So, as you know, the title of our workshop is How to Develop a Research Agenda, and I want to start by talking about what we're not going to cover. So we are not going to talk about what is architectural research. This is an incredibly important question, but it takes much more than a workshop, maybe a full conference to reach a definition of what is architectural research and what is not. We're not going to talk about how to do actually architectural research. The assumption is all of you are already have some expertise in terms of methodologies and different types of research. So the focus will be on your role and how you can develop your own work, what types of activities should you aim for, how do you manage interactions with your institution and so on. It's also, I'm going to hopefully be a bit more interactive, so it's not going to be me just talking. I want to hear from you, and we're going to try, you're going to use your cell phone, so get your cell phones, and the first thing I want to ask you to do is identify yourself. I can probably ask you to identify yourselves, but we might as well use it. So to join these calls, you either go online to this website, pollev.com/ or just text 37607, text this phrase. Once you text it once, then you'll be able to directly text your answers to the following questions. Either way should work. So again, text my name, which is a pretty long name, 643 to 37607, and then select your answers, or go to pollev.com. Again, that long phrase.
It's hard to understand you, and I see the poll. There's a poll on the screen, but it's not.
There is a poll on the screen, yes.
But I don't seem to be able to use it because I.
Well, did you text the number?
No, I don't know what you're talking. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the number.
Do you see the top of the screen, Julia?
Yeah.
So it says text my name.
Okay.
643 to the number 37607.
Okay. Let's see. Text. Let's see.
I think I need to get out of. You just give me a second. I want to get out of presenter mode.
Does it have to be caps?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, that's going to take a while.
Take your time. I believe so. Let me try again. Yeah, the text is all caps then. So HAZEMRASHEDALI. So these are the times I wish my name was simpler than that. 643, text that to 37607, and then select your answer. We already have, well, I don't know how many. I'll give you a couple more minutes.
What does it mean when you say 237607? That means what I don't get.
The number that you text to is 37607. The phrase that you text is my full name followed by 643. And you only need to do that once. So after that, you can just directly text.
I guess, so it's supposed to be to the number, then your name. I don't get it. I'm sorry. Well, it doesn't matter. I just won't do it.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm a professor, so you could just put that in there for me.
I will do that. Okay, so I think 3 of you have done it already. 4. Okay, so we're almost there. Are we missing anybody? Okay, perfect. Great. We have 5 people answering right now. I think everybody has answered. Everybody has answered. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the next thing that I want to ask you is to think about, from your perspective, what are the largest barriers to developing a research agenda? And you can text multiple, try to use keywords, and you can text multiple keywords to the same number. You don't have to text that my name again, but in your view, again, what do you consider to be the largest barriers that affect your ability to develop a research agenda? Okay. Research methods. Administration. Wow. Thank you. Okay. Administration is a barrier. It certainly can be. Okay. Learning, money, true. Software, it's great. Software and tools. Money is not the biggest word though, which is good. Credibility, it's an important one as well. Money is getting bigger. Okay. 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 Wow. Maybe I shouldn't have pointed that out. Okay. Time, absolutely. Finding, I'm assuming this is funding, yeah, which is money. Okay, methods. That's great. So the only thing we're not going to talk about today, as I mentioned, is research methods, but I completely accept that it is certainly an area of learning that all of us have to go through, especially if you have not gone through a research degree, a master's or a PhD. That sometimes helps, although most of the time you still need to build on what you learned in your research degrees, but all the other things we'll try to hopefully address. You guys have a lot of barriers. Okay. Okay, let's move forward. Thank you. Okay, so even though we're not going to define what architectural research is, let's at least agree that research is about creating new knowledge, right? That's really the ultimate goal, regardless of discipline. That new knowledge has to be relevant to something or somebody, to an audience. Usually the audience could be your peers, it could be stakeholders in the community, it could be your institution. So if you're doing research that nobody cares about, great, you can be self-satisfied, but it's not really that beneficial. And certainly if you're trying to develop a research agenda that is acknowledged and respected by your community, your peers, then your area of interest, the knowledge that you're creating needs to be relevant and accepted by that community. And hopefully somebody somewhere is going to use it. I know we all talk about master's and PhD theses like living on shelves or on the cloud right now, but hopefully your goal, I mean, all of us hope that what we do ends up being relevant and useful to someone somewhere at a certain point of time. The one thing I would add is that for a research agenda to be acknowledged and respected, you need to have some objective way of measuring what you're doing. So just you thinking that what you're doing is great works for you, but it may not work for everybody else. So if you want to gain respectability, if you want to move forward in your career, then you need to find ways of having your work recognized, evaluated, measured, for lack of a better word. How to do that varies depending on what it is that you want to do, but in general, that should be one of your objectives. You're not just doing work for yourself. You're not doing work to put it on your drawer. So a few things that you need to think about. So first of all, we are a discipline that is incredibly diverse in terms of our research activities. So you go to any school of architecture, you'll find historians, you'll find artists, you'll definitely find a lot of designers, you'll find people who do technology and scientific work, you find people who work in the humanities. This variety of disciplines is both interesting, but also could be somewhat confusing to a new researcher. You may have real clarity about your domain, what you do. If not, then you probably need to figure it out. And it doesn't need to be one thing. It could be a mixture of multiple areas, but you still need to be clear about that in your mind at least, and then hopefully find ways of demonstrating that to your peers and to your audience. You also need to think about why is it that you believe your research is important. It must be important because you're doing it, otherwise why do it? But how do you demonstrate that? How do you convince others that what you do is important? And again, that usually involves some mode of production, and that mode of production needs to be accepted and recognized by your peer. We'll go back to some of these points later on, but I just wanted to give you an overview. Who you work with will be an important part of the question. Some of us still work on our own, and that's perfectly fine. I still have colleagues who tell me, just let me work. I have my computer, I have my room, I'll close the door and I'll produce the next book or whatever it is. That is perfectly fine. I personally like to collaborate. There are different types of collaboration, but I found that collaboration expands what you can do. You also learn from it. You learn from others. I learn from my students. I learn from my colleagues in my college. I learn from colleagues that I've worked with outside my discipline. I actually learn from those quite a bit because they challenge you when you work with somebody from a different discipline, and you have to prove to them that you're a good collaborator. So you have to see things from their perspective to a certain degree. But at the same time, you're also helping them see things from your perspective. So it brings disciplines together. You can do so much more when you work with people from other disciplines. We'll come back and talk about collaboration in a bit more detail. Then you need to think about what is it that you want to do? What is your mode of production? And that's both determined by your field of inquiry to a certain degree, but also by your own strength and preferences. Some people, again, their target is books. Historians are like that. For the historian, it's my next book. That's their primary objective. For some people, it's getting money. Some sub-disciplines in our schools do have, let's say, more of an ability to generate external funding than others. For all of us, it's definitely a lot more difficult than many other disciplines, but some of us have more opportunities, but then you need to learn how to build on that. Some of us rely on journal publications, conference proceedings, some of us do exhibits, some of us do design work. So you need to think about what is it that you do, what is your strength, what helps you demonstrate the value of your work the most. And again, that also ties into the type of work that you do, the area of research that you do. Where do you do your research? Again, is it in your room on your computer, or do you need a lab, or do you need to go into the field, or how much time do you need? Time is a major constraint for architecture faculty. Most of us, if not all of us, teach studio. Studio is incredibly time consuming compared to other disciplines. So it does affect our ability to produce. Sometimes a good way of overcoming that is to try to link our research with our teaching as much as we can. So this way you're kind of achieving two objectives, and you're trying to take advantage of your studios. So it's not just teaching as part of your scholarship as well. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but again, it's certainly possible. So let's try to pick some of these ideas and get your input on that as well. So let's start with, what is your research domain? What is your area of research? And again, feel free to text multiple answers to that if you wish. I was hoping for a larger audience and a larger diversity, because usually when you do that with a large audience, you end up with everything. We do every type of research that at least I'm aware of. Maybe experimental lab research, not so much, but other than that, so materials, environments, people, buildings, technology, all of these are part of what architecture researchers do. Visualization. It's an incredibly important and growing area of interest, combined with data analysis and data science sometimes. Many universities are focusing on that. Urban studies, communities, energy. I hate to say that as an energy person, but it's no longer a cutting edge area. It's still an important area. It was 20 years ago. Anyway. Psychological research, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bioclimatic research, gender issues. It's an incredibly important and emerging area that needs a lot of work. Geomorphology, health. So I think you can see that the variety, and these areas relate to really different research traditions, different methodologies, different approaches, which is why our work is so difficult. We pride ourselves as designers that we have the ability to synthesize different fields of knowledge, which is great, but it's finding that balance between doing everything and having a specialization. That's probably one of the key things that as an emerging researcher, you need to figure out. What is your expertise? As a researcher, you're expected to have an area of expertise. You probably need to be aware of the wider range of potential topics, but who are you within all of that large spectrum? I think is a critical question that you need to answer. And that can change over time. People kind of morph from one area to another. Sometimes the change is drastic. Sometimes it's just slight shifts that happens over one's career. But at any given moment in time, I would argue that you need to have clarity about what is it that you consider to be your primary expertise. And you need to think about how you're going to demonstrate that expertise. A jack of all trades is an old proverb, right? Jack of all trades, a master of none. You need to be a master of something. You need to know about a lot of things, but you need to be a master of something. Geospatial research, okay. So since urban issues, behavioral issues, and technology, if you combine geospatial research under technology, these seem to be the dominant areas in our audience, at least. Okay, how about collaboration? Do you work with anybody, or do you work primarily on your own? Here is the single answer, unfortunately. You do all, right?
And all of the above, you should have one called all of the above.
True, I should have had that one. Yes, I agree. I agree. Okay, great. So interdisciplinary collaboration is alive and well, which is very important, because I honestly think this is one of the areas in which we can have the most impact, do the most good, because we can help other disciplines do things that they would never be able to do without us. And they give us access to resources that we probably would not have access to without them, and learn from them. I'm not disputing that. So I'm happy to see this as the more dominant model for our small group. Okay. What does your research involve in terms of activities? Do you write? Do you collect data? Do you do design? So let's talk about that as well. And here again, feel free to add multiple answers. The experiments is interesting. Simulations.
Yeah.
So can I ask, what types of experiments do you do? If anybody wants to share.
Yeah, in terms of multidisciplinary work, working with either engineers or biologists
Okay,
and doing.
lab experiments? Or,
Yeah,
okay, that's very interesting.
yeah, and then doing experiments himself or using many of their experiments.
Okay.
to present them.
Controlled experiments or field studies?
Both.
Both, okay,
Yeah.
okay. Very good, very good.
Next 2 minutes.
Sure, yeah. That certainly is important. Design. I hate to plug in our next conference because my institution will be hosting it, but the 2023 conference is investigating the relationship between design and research, the interface between them, which I think is a critical area of discussion. Hopefully we'll see all of you there. Interaction with the community engagement can be a very interesting area of research. I think it's an underutilized area of research in our discipline. I think we can do a lot more to use our community engagement activities to generate knowledge, in addition to having them be helpful and impactful to the communities. Both are very important objectives. I don't think one is more important than the other, but they're certainly not mutually exclusive. You can do both at the same time. Okay. Statistics, not my favorite topic, but an important one. It is. I have a statistics reference that I pull out of the library whenever I want to do statistics work. Or call a friend, that works as well. Okay. This is great. So again, I think you get the point that I was trying to make, right? That we really don't have a specific area of research or type of research or approach to research. We cover the entire spectrum, which again, makes our life very interesting, but also very difficult. And as a junior researcher, this is challenging because you see many things that you can do and you can probably do well. The challenge is to find your sweet spot. There's certain things that you do better than anybody else or better than most people. That's what you need to be seeking. Even if you have other areas that are interesting, maybe those can come at a later point. I have a PhD student right now that I've been talking to her for 6 months about how to do that. She's a designer. Whenever she reads an article, she starts moving in that tangent and then this tangent and then that tangent. It's like, no, you cannot do that. You're not going to go anywhere. It's very interesting. It's very exciting to do that. And she probably has the ability to learn all of these things, but if it will always be up here, it will never have enough depth. So to get depth, you need to at least temporarily identify what is it that you want to do, how do you want to do it. Okay, so we already talked about those modes of production. So these modes of production are based on an ACSA report that I had the pleasure of participating to 3 or 4 years ago. It was titled Developing or Assessing Quality in Architectural Research, which is a critically important topic for our discipline, I would argue. So we talked about each one of these modes of research, of production, and how do you really demonstrate quality in each one of them. Like you can write a book and self-publish it. Might be an incredibly impactful book, but nobody's going to recognize that, right? But if you publish a book with UT Press or Columbia or whatever, or Routledge or any of the major publishers, just the fact that this publisher allowed you to publish it is a measure of quality, because they would not have done that if your work was not good enough. Most of them would have sent your proposal to multiple experts in the field before they would let you even start on it, right? So, and again, that is usually the most difficult area of discussion that I have with my faculty in my institution, because we always have that sense that what we do is good. Yes, otherwise we would not be doing it, but that's not the issue. It's how you demonstrate that quality to an external audience, and how do you do that objectively? Because an external audience is always worried about bias. Bias is a big issue. So how do I do that how do I demonstrate the quality and the impact of my work in an objective manner so that the external audience, whether it's your chair, your dean, or much more difficult, the institution, who are people who, so the chair and the dean most of the time share an understanding of architecture with you, which makes things easier, not easy, but easier. But the institution usually don't. The provost who makes the decision, the president who signs off on the decision. Most of the time, they don't understand architectural research, and just telling them, we think we are good because we think we're good, I don't think that really works, right? So how do you do that? So publishing your work is a good step forward. Where you publish matters. Yes, you can go to a regional conference and publish a wonderful paper. But if you go to the RCC, again, I apologize for the plug, but it is an international conference. We're pretty rigorous in reviewing and accepting our abstracts, and that's what you use when you write your statement. When you put your dossier together, you say, I went and published, got accepted for ARCC, I got accepted for ACSA, I got accepted for other prominent conferences that have really low acceptance rates. That matters. Now you don't need to say I'm good because I think I'm good, because you have an external metric to do that. The best venues are the ones that have peer review. Among those, the best ones are in my view, maybe other people may disagree. Among those, the ones that have blind peer review are the best. Because blind peer review, again, it's that issue of the perception of bias. If you know who's in, like, as you can see, we all know each other, right? So if I'm reviewing a person and I know who that person is, I usually try to be objective, but I'm a human being, right? So I could be affected by who is it that I'm reviewing. And just having that perception is something that you should be trying to avoid. So blind peer review is meant to at least avoid that. Does that mean that you're not going to get reviews back and you would read that and you would think, just tell me who that person is and I'm going to go and kill them? I've thought that multiple times, right? Blind peer review isn't perfect, but again, it avoids that perception of bias. It provides that sense of objectivity. Invited work could be important as well, but it depends on who's inviting you and what's the value of what's the level of the event that you're being invited to. So if you become a keynote speaker in an international ACSA conference, yeah, that absolutely is an acknowledgement that you're a respected person in your discipline among your peers, and that counts for something, right? But there are also other possible publication venues in which being invited to publish in may not be the best use of your time, because the same work you can probably send to a more prestigious venue, go through the peer review process and get published, and that would count a lot more. And these are the things that you need to be thinking about. So I'm not suggesting that you always go for the most difficult journal to publish in or the most difficult publishers. You should absolutely try, but I would probably recommend having a mix. So you try for a venue that is way up here and then another one that is here and then another one that is maybe here, but certainly don't try to avoid the ones that are really demonstrably, objectively not going to put you in the best light. So it's really about the venue that will get others to accept the quality of your work, even if they don't read it. Even if I don't read a paper published in Nature magazine, like if somebody gets published in Nature, that's a big thing. And many of those articles are invited. But to be invited to publish in Nature, it's not a large number of people that get invited to be published in Nature. So yes, you can demonstrate value through invitations, but it's a bit more tricky. Blind peer review, if you have a blind peer review venue, then almost everybody will accept a certain, especially a venue that has a low acceptance rate. Almost everybody would accept that as an objective measure of evaluation. Invitations, you have to be a bit more careful about. Long-term impact, citations are a good way of demonstrating that. Citations are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It is a flawed system, but so far it's the only one that we have. I hope it improves. There are ways of increasing your citation numbers that I would never recommend, but I know people do them, right? So those of us who look at citation numbers have that at the back of our mind. How many of these are self-citations? How many of these are reciprocal citations? That does happen. I will cite your work, you cite mine. And that's a way of benefiting both of us. Sadly, that happens. But still, if you have a large number of citations generated by different publications, that is generally accepted as an objective measure of quality. Exhibitions are challenging, but again, it's about the venue. It's about whether it's a curated exhibit or not, and who's the curator. It's about is it your exhibit, or is it just one piece that was accepted in a larger exhibit, like an exhibit of your work, or again, a small contribution to a larger exhibit? And there's no clear answer here. It really depends on what is it that you do. Journal rankings, if you want to think about journals, journal rankings matter. The problem is most of our architecture journals are not that highly ranked, not because they're not good, because we're not good in publishing. It's improving. So the Journal of Architecture Education, one of our better journals, it doesn't really compare well if you look at the journal ranking websites, because it doesn't publish as much as other journals. It doesn't have as many number of citations generated. That's a disciplinary challenge that those of us at that level are really worried about and are trying to improve. But just publishing in a journal that has a reputation in your discipline could be valuable, and you could be making that case. Yes, I understand this journal isn't really highly ranked compared to engineering journals or science journals and so on, but in my sub-discipline, in my area, this is the best place I can publish. And if you can convince people of that, you've done a very good job. Community engagement is an area that I'm seeing that quite a bit. I have faculty who do community engagement work and they publish, and very few journals accept community engagement publications. So I have to go and find how many of those, and if there are only 4 or 5 and they manage to get into one of them, and I go to the journal site and I verify that it's a blind peer review, they have a low acceptance rate and so on, I accept that as a valuable journal. I have to. I cannot say, yeah, you have to aim for a Q1 journal. Sometimes you can. Sometimes your area does not have that, while other disciplines may. So out of all the areas of research that you guys contributed a few minutes ago, I think they can be categorized into these 4 major categories. So the creative arts, that's where we started, right? That most of us do some form of creative activity. May not be the research that we do, although some of our colleagues have that as their area of research, and that's perfectly fine. The humanities, social sciences, and then the hard sciences, sciences and technology. So if I ask you to kind of place yourself in one of these, and I don't have all of the above, I apologize, although it could work here as well. Where do you see yourself in these 4 areas? What is your the primary area where you would place yourself? So is this only one answer, or is everybody picking sciences and technology?
I would say I'm a combo of A, B, and C.
Sure, I accept that. I'm not surprised that sciences and technologies and then social sciences are dominant, because they kind of are in our discipline to a certain degree. I have faculty who work in humanities. I have faculty who work in creative arts, so I know they exist, absolutely, and they're very valued members of our faculty. Okay. So which of these 4 areas do you think is the easiest one to develop a research agenda in? And let me ask you, just feel free to jump in.
D.
D. It is the easiest. Why?
I think because it likely produces the most quantitative
Okay.
data, and it's easier to kind of wrap your head around it.
Okay, fair enough. Other thoughts?
More opportunities.
More opportunities for science,
For
for science
funding.
and technology as well, Julia? Is that what you're arguing for?
I think the reason that I'm not sure that there's more opportunities for funding in sciences and technology and architectures. So
Fair enough. I accept that as well. Okay. Jeez.
I think that it's dealing with the quantitative research, but I feel like it's like accountable and it is easy to deal with numbers that it is people so easy.
Okay.
Sam, could you, when people speak in the room, it's so echoey.
I will try to repeat it, yes.
Yeah, thanks.
So Yuzo was saying that it's more quantifiable, it's more measurable or easier to measure in terms of impact, or in terms of modes of production, or in terms of conducting the research itself, or both? Both of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anybody that thinks technology, science and technology is not the easiest area to work with?
Those who don't work with it.
Actually, I find that the ones who think of it as the easiest area are usually people who don't work in it.
We have the most established research method.
Correct.
You know, science and technology can do certain things, and methods, testing, and so on. Social sciences is evolving to very robust research methods and approaches to this. The humanities, you have very, very large ways that in which you can achieve the goals, and they do not follow the hypothesis testing model.
Correct.
That's why you have this issue with the vagueness of outcomes and the inability to convince others that what you do is valuable, and especially get grants or support because of that lack of established research.
Correct. So Julia, Adil is arguing that science and technology has the most established research methods. You would probably agree with that, having read things that you've written previously, right?
Right, yeah.
Yes.
I have to read them for option B. The first one is that science is more, topics in the science and technology is more tangible, and people deal with that are willing to explore more. The second reason is that science and technology is more high demand compared with the other. And the last one is that in science and technology, there is a lot of space to explore more and more, but the other topics are, explored enough, and there is no new doors open.
Okay, not sure I agree with that. There are always new doors that you can open, but they're more difficult to open. Let's put it this way. They are more difficult to open.
There are, but they are not easy to catch.
I would accept that. Yes, I would accept that.
Yes, I consider that the fields are quantitative for sure, but on the flip side, you have fast-paced changes. So the state of the art is
Changes every minute.
exactly
Absolutely.
It's on top.
And this is why, as a technology person, I don't necessarily think of them as the easiest ones, because every year I have to update my knowledge. Otherwise, I really envy my history faculty whose references they don't go away, right? I mean, it's the same reference probably. I need to be up to date, and if I'm not up to date, I'm dated, and that is a challenge.
In a matter of months, actually.
I would argue sometimes less than that. Sometimes less than that. I've seen things change in a much shorter time frame than that. But definitely months or a year, you really have to be on top of things. Otherwise, you're dated.
This is a pragmatic answer to this, is that the creative arts and humanities do not present papers in ARCC conference.
True.
So we don't have that representation in this group. They
Fair
have
enough.
different ways that they present their ideas and so on, and they don't, as I said, they don't fit in the model that ARCC.
That is true.
And maybe we need to think about ARCC opening its venues and allow for a multitude of research that happens, not
Absolutely.
only the one that follows.
And if I put on the hat that I laid down 2 years ago as the FCC president, at the time that was a major issue, and we tried, and it's a big challenge. And part of it, so the fact that we don't have as many people who work in design and the creative art in the ARCC conferences, part of it is our fault, but also part of it is that they don't see what they do as research some of the time. So it's hard to convince them to come and show their work in a research conference, because to them, what they do is different. Whether that's true or not is debatable, depends on how they do it, I would argue. But that is a major issue that I think as a discipline we need to figure out. And you need to be in Dallas next year to see if we can figure it out or not. Yes.
So do you think because of maybe the lack of knowledge that people are not aware of what they're doing is research, the reason that is not published or not that popular as science and technology or social sciences? Like, I can understand that we have all the science and technology people here, but even if you go out in the world, it might be the same case. It may be a little bit, it could be probably because it's not that popular, or maybe one point, I was mentioned that not established research methods. So even if someone wants to do it, they probably don't know how to do it.
I would, so Julia, the comment is one of the factors that's affecting the lack of researchers who work in the design and creative art as a field of inquiry is lack of knowledge. I think to a certain extent that could be true. The term architectural research is a relatively recent term, and not all of us have training in research methods. Some of us do, some of us don't. I've found in my roles as associate dean of research, it's a lot easier to work with faculty who do come from a research background, but the others offer just as much potential. It's just how to get them to see their work in maybe a slightly different way than they're used to understand how research is being perceived again by external audiences. I think we have some work to do as a discipline in that area as well. Yes. Yes.
Another fundamental difference. Peer reviews and that domain falls under the positivist worldview, in which
it's a big discussion. Yes.
Where constructivists in art do not have necessity for the worlds to meet. And so I can develop my own research, I develop my own rules, and it will be very difficult for somebody from an outside view to measure what I do and so on. So it's very difficult to have peer review in a constructivist worldview.
Yes, which is a big challenge. Yeah, which is a big challenge. I could ask you would that qualify as research in this case, but I'm not going to do that because that's a big discussion.
Maybe thinking about how people having to write about their work is another big barrier for a lot of people in the creative fields.
As in writing skills, being able to write.
And knowing what to say about their work that makes it into something that someone else could discuss and evaluate.
Because we're more visually oriented, right? Especially those of us who work in these areas, correct? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
That definitely is a challenge. Writing is a skill the same as all other skills, and it takes training and it takes trial and error. And I look back at things that I've written, I wouldn't say 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I was like, how on earth did I write that? This is so bad. Yeah, that's the way it works. Okay, so if we map these fields of inquiry to opportunities and modes of production, and I did not generate this graph. This was generated by a colleague of mine, Professor Philip Plowright, who is the editor of Inquiry, our ARCC research journal. He's from Lawrence Tech University. I think Philip did it. Anyway, so it looks like something Philip will do. Let's put it this way. This is really an attempt to demonstrate the easier, or the paths of less, not least, but less resistance for each of these fields of inquiry. So if you want to go after funding, yes, as I think most of you have said, it is slightly easier to do it if you're working in technology related areas. It is by no means easy, but it is slightly easier. Publishing, journal papers, etc. again, is the most difficult in the creative arts. partly because of what Julia said, what all of you said, really, it's not really how they express themselves. They don't have the skill sets. They think in slightly different ways. They don't have venues. So there are really a lot of issues there. You can publish books about your work, though. I've seen a lot of people in the creative arts who published not detailed, large volumes, but very valuable books that are much more visually oriented and that are appropriate for the type of work that they do. Exhibitions are definitely an area that they excel in, that almost all of the others, myself included, would not go there because it's not our forte, it's not our strength. While people who work in creative arts do that, they're also very good about generating media attention, probably related to their visual skills. It's much easier to capture people's attention. We all know that, we're designers, right? Using visual media, you can do that more easily than if you write a 100-page journal with nobody or few people would read. So as you're thinking about where you want to place yourself, you need to be kind of conscious of this. What is your strength? What is it that you do best? And what interests you? Because the first question, I think the first and the last, is always, you don't want to work in an area that you're not interested in. Life becomes incredibly boring if you're not doing something that you like. So to me, the first challenge is, what is it that you love to do? But then what is it that you do well? And usually the two correlate. For most of us, I think we love what we do because we do it well, to a certain degree, maybe. If we didn't do it well, we'll probably question ourselves, is this the right place for me? I might try something else. But if you have both of these points covered, I think you're well on your way to being successful. Okay, let me talk as an administrator for a while, because it's a challenge for all administrators to make sure that all of our faculty are recognized for the great work that they do. Because even the technology people do not fit the classic model that universities have. And we also don't generate as much money as other disciplines do. That in many cases counts against us. The challenge is, how do we demonstrate our value? How do we demonstrate our impact? And here, I think my first suggestion to you is to understand your context. Because within schools of architecture, within universities, the expectations vary tremendously. If you're in engineering, most likely, regardless of which university you go to, you'll be expected to do the same thing. Some universities may ask you to generate $100,000 a year, others $2 million a year, maybe. But almost all engineering faculty that I know, and I know quite a few, have that expectation. You have to get money. Otherwise, you're probably not going to get tenure. Is that a good thing? I don't think so. It's just how their discipline works. But universities like that. And it's easier, definitely easier to get tenure if you've gotten a couple $1 million of research fund. I hate to say that, but it's true. But again, institutions do vary in what they value. Some institutions, for example, are much more open to community engagement as a form of scholarship than others. I think we're moving in that direction, which is a good direction to move in. But like Auburn, for example, an excellent example of a university that has recognized community engagement as a form of scholarship for quite a long time. They were kind of leading the way in that area. Not only, I know universities who would never let you count community engagement as scholarship. It is service. Maybe it will count under teaching, but it's not scholarship to that university. So understand your institution. Talk to your chair. If you can, talk to your dean or school director. Talk to your colleagues, but I would add a warning sign talking to your colleagues. Don't talk to your colleagues about what they did to get tenure 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, because that probably won't work. So I went through that experience personally. When I first joined as a tenure track faculty, there was a colleague, much more senior colleague that I love dearly, we're great friends now, who said, okay, I'm gonna show you my tenure dossier. was my second semester. And he brought his tenure dossier and he showed it to me. And he was incredibly proud. And I'm not saying anything on that. But had I done what he did, I know I would not be here today. There's no way. It's not going to happen. If you're starting a tenure track career now, think about what's going to be the expectations 5 years from now. Not even the expectations now, and certainly not what the expectations were 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Universities are changing in some ways that I like and others that I don't. But pragmatically, I know they are. And we all need to be conscious of that. Does that mean that you have to change your work to fit the model that you're not happy with? No, but you need to work with it. You need to find creative ways of again, demonstrating the value of the work that you do. And it usually ends up being a mixture of all of the above, like I was saying. So to me, that's step number one for any starting faculty member. Where are you? What expectations do you have? That's a very difficult question to answer because universities do not want to answer that. They do not want to tell you, we want you to do this. They certainly don't want to tell you, we want you to do this much. Because you might be able to do twice as much. And if they tell you, we want you to do this much, you'll get to that point and stop. And they don't want you to stop. They want you to continue. So in some institutions, you might find clarity on you need to do X, Y, and Z. Most universities that I'm aware of will give you targets, like high-level targets that you need to be aiming for, but they'll never tell you, this is the amount of work that you need to do to get tenure. At least I have not seen that. Maybe, I mean, I don't know, am I missing on?
These big
Impactful, internationally recognized, right? Things like that. So what does that mean? They're never going to tell you. And that frustrated me as a tenure track faculty. It frustrates my tenure track faculty when they come and ask me that question, like, what should I do? I don't have an answer to that. And the next, even if I had, let's say I talked to the provost that we have right now, and that provost for some reason told me, your faculty need to do this, well, he or she may leave tomorrow and somebody else may come in with a completely different expectation, usually more demanding expectation. It's a challenge, but it's certainly not impossible. And I know all of you, the fact that you're here, the fact that you made it so far tells me that you have the ability to do it if you just think about it in the right way. Again, what modes of production are appropriate for you? What is it that you're comfortable doing? What helps you demonstrate the value of your work the most? What fits your skill sets? Sometimes that requires acquiring some new skill sets. So if you're not a good writer, you take writing classes, you do writing workshops, you go to writing groups. All universities that now have that level of support. If you think your work provides the opportunity for external funding, but you've never done that before, well, that's a skill as well. You go and talk to faculty who have done that. You go to, again, proposal writing workshops. You work with university support systems. That's the one thing they would love to help you in, because they want you to go after that funding. And it is a skill, or actually it's a series of skills that you have to acquire. What do I write in that proposal? How do I put a budget together? Just 3 weeks ago, I had a faculty member who applied for a national grant, and she missed a line in the RFP that says that the maximum amount that applies for buying equipment and tools out of that grant is X. The total amount of the grant was 4X. She asked for the total. She asked for everything as tools. And they came back and told her, yeah, you got the grant. We love the proposal. We're going to fund you. The problem is we cannot give you more than X for tools. So the other 3X essentially was lost. Next time, she's not going to do that mistake again, right? She's going to read the RFP in a lot more detail. But that happens. That really does happen. Again, how do you write it? What do you ask for? What do you not ask for? How do you speak to the funder? How do you essentially give them an RFP that fits what they want? Because they're not going to give you money unless you can fit within their agenda, right? Most funding agencies have a set of objectives that they want to achieve. And if you're not targeting their objectives, is it impossible that they might still give you money? Yeah, it's not impossible. Certainly not likely, though. So in a way, sometimes that requires, like, essentially finding your strength. It requires you building up your strength in a certain area as well. Set objectives. That's another thing that I think as a starting faculty member or somebody who's looking for a tenure track faculty position, certainly once you get a faculty position, you need to start setting your objectives. Most universities have the same time frame for tenure review. You start, after 2.5 years, you get kind of a mid-review point. In most schools, it's called the third-year review. And then after 5 years, year 6 is where you get your full tenure review. If you're smart, you need to essentially schedule yourself so that you hit your stride after year 5. Your major piece of work that you're aiming for, if you get that in the summer of year 5, that's the best thing you can hope for. That major publication, that book, that large grant, right? So, and that requires planning. What is it? What are your short-term objectives? What are your medium-term objectives? And what are your long-term objectives? And you also need to have objectives beyond tenure. One of the things that tenure review processes in most universities look at is not just what you did, but your future potential. Because they don't want you to get tenure and stop. That's not what universities want. And if your tenure dossier is not making a strong enough case for your future potential, which would involve having some clarity about where are you going next, then that might be an issue. That might be a weakness in your review. Would you agree with that, Julia?
Yes, absolutely. The promise. How much promise do you have?
Major issue. So in a way, you want to, again, reach your prime in year 5, but you also want to show that you can go further and higher and make a convincing case for that. Okay, let's talk about funding. Funding is the unicorn of architecture research. It's not impossible. I've gotten some funding projects in my career. I know colleagues who've done much better than I did. I know colleagues who got federal funding, which is incredibly difficult to get. College, when I say colleagues, I mean colleagues in schools of architecture. Like NSF grants typically have an acceptance rate of 5%, 6%. If you think about that, like out of every 20 proposals that get submitted, 1 gets funded. And NSF and other federal agencies have a tendency to fund people they have funded before, which is, it's a vicious cycle, right? So if you've never been funded by NSF, your likelihood of getting funded by NSF is not that high. To get funded by NSF, you have to get funded by NSF. That's really, that's how you think about it, right? One good strategy is to break that cycle is to work with people who have gotten NSF. So you're essentially trying to kind of latch on to somebody who's done it before, get your name on their databases once or twice, then you can be the PI on the 3rd one, on the 4th one. And again, I'm not saying you can like submit a career. I don't know, are you guys familiar with the career program in NSF? Okay, the career program is the only, well, maybe the only is a bit too much because I don't know all of them, but it is one of the few NSF programs that require a single PI, and it is directed at junior faculty. So you apply literally in your 3rd or 4th year, you get a couple of times, I think 3 times, 3 tries at it, 3 bites at the apple, so to speak. It's $500,000. So for a junior faculty, that's not a small amount. For a junior faculty in architecture, if you get it, you are tenured. I promise you that. In any university that I know of, get career, you're tenured, even if you didn't do anything else. But because it's aimed at junior faculty and it's a single PI program, the expectations of prior NSF funding are not as high, but still it is an incredibly difficult program to get funded through. It really is. I have colleagues who have tried multiple times and failed, and some who succeeded. So sometimes it's also a balance. Do I go after the really difficult programs and fail multiple times because there's like a 1 in 20 chance that I might get it? Yes, if you get it, you're done. Or do I go for more achievable targets and get those and build my credibility in this way? There are arguments for both. I have a very good colleague who I know, so he didn't go for a career, he went for another program that is incredibly competitive, and he applied 3 times without getting it. And I would see him in conferences and we would discuss it, and I would try to indirectly tell him, man, you're kind of wasting your time. This is clearly a very difficult objective. Well, 4th time he got it. He applied the 4th time and he got it. He's now the associate dean in USC, University of Southern California. So yeah, it can happen. So I'm definitely not telling you not to do it, but you need to think about it. You need to make sure that you have the time to dedicate it. And what I would suggest is that if you want to do that, have a backup plan. Like, what if that doesn't work? Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. If you get that, great. But just in case it doesn't, what will be your way of demonstrating the quality of your work? Because unfunded grant proposals is not a good way of demonstrating impact. And that's a problem that I see in many CVs of my faculty. They think it demonstrates effort and dedication and so on, and it does. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But it also casts doubt on your ability. If you're trying to get something multiple times and it doesn't work, somebody somewhere, probably at the university level, is going to start asking why. And then your dean will have to go and say, this is incredibly difficult and people in our discipline never get it and so on. And it might work. But why put your administrator in a defensive position? You need to put them in a positive position. They need to be arguing for the good things that you did, as opposed to arguing why these things didn't work. So I personally don't put any funding proposals that I didn't get on my CV. And believe me, there are quite a few. I just don't put them.
I wanted to just point out that at our university anyway, there's internal funding.
Absolutely.
And that would be very helpful to making time and energy to make a external proposal.
Absolutely. And that's an excellent point, Julia, and I would definitely second that. Most, if not all universities, especially R1 and R2 universities, have very robust programs for seed funding. They would range anywhere from $2,000 or $3,000, which may be enough for you to get a project going, to maybe $20,000 or $30,000. Some have more. Those usually are interdisciplinary, but they do exist. They're a good stepping stone. I think what I would add to that is that it probably shouldn't be the only thing that you go after, seed funding, but definitely it's easier to compete with people from your university only, as opposed to competing at the national level. And maybe that seed funding will help you generate some preliminary outputs that then become part of that next larger proposal and demonstrate again. So funding agencies, their biggest fear is that they're going to give you money and you're not going to do anything with it. You're not going to do what you promise you will do. This is, in a way, why NSF and other federal agencies love to fund people who've been funded before, because they trust them. They know that they did it. They managed to do whatever it is that they promised to do. If you're a new name, there's always that doubt. Yes, you may be a faculty member in a prominent universities. You might have a PhD. You might have publications, but you don't have a track record of funded research, and therefore there is that doubt in their mind as to, what are you going to do with my money? If I give you a couple $100,000, what are you going to do with it? And that's partly your research skills, but it's also partly your administrative abilities. If you've ever worked on a funded research grant, it is a pain to manage. You pay students, you buy stuff, you make sure, and all of these bits and pieces, some universities provide support for that, many don't. So you end up having to do it yourself. And if you're not well organized, I've seen projects that have become a financial mess because the faculty member did not get the right type of support and they just couldn't do it themselves. And if that happens with a funding agency, I guarantee you, they're never going to give you money again. They're probably not going to give money to anybody from your institution again. So it's a big issue to be able to manage your projects well. The third source, so we jumped to seed funding, but there is a third source to get funding, which is through contracts. Contracts have the downside of not being peer reviewed. So usually contracts are money that you get from local agencies, maybe from regional agencies. So you develop networks, you get to know people, you can tell them this is the work that I do. I can give you value and whatever it is that you want to achieve and so on. And if you convince them with that, you have the money. So it's a lot easier to get, especially if you have good ideas and if you know the right people as well. On the downside, it doesn't have peer review, and peer review again is a strong indicator of competitiveness and quality. But they're a good way of, again, building a track record. So if you have a few grants, it makes your application to that competitive grant that much more likely to be funded, because they'll look at your CV and they'll say, these are these 3 or 4 projects, and they'll see publications coming out of these projects. So clearly they went well and they were successful and so on. And that helps. It works with that doubt that they might have about awarding you some money. The last thing that I want to leave you with is that, yes, it is difficult to get funding in architecture. It certainly isn't impossible. There are quite a few faculty in architecture that have not just small, yes, most of us are in the small to medium. By medium, and again, here I'm referring to a survey that we did for ACSA a few years back. The majority of projects were around $50,000 to $100,000, which is not bad for schools. For many schools of architecture, that's like 100% of what they get every year, or 50% of what they get every year. So it's not a small amount for a school of architecture. It's nothing for engineering. But I know people who've gotten multiple, like $200, $300, $400, $500 grants. I know a couple who went into the millions, usually as part of larger teams. Which is the last point I want to mention about this. I think I mentioned that a few minutes ago. For funding, working with collaborators is a very, very effective way, much more effective than if you go after it on your own, especially collaborators from disciplines that have a higher likelihood of getting funding. That doesn't have to be engineering, although definitely engineering is one of those. But social sciences actually have very robust funding programs. Education has very robust funding programs. So there are disciplines that are not quantitatively oriented, are not technologically oriented, but still have very strong and very robust funding programs that are out there. And working with those disciplines could be your way in. And once you have 1 or 2 grants under your belt, yes, you can be the PI, but don't be worried about being a co-PR.
Maybe it would be good to have a session on developing collaboration with architectural research.
That's a very good suggestion. Absolutely, because it's not easy. It is definitely not an easy thing to do. Sure.
Why is funding in architecture smaller than others? Is it seen as less important? Is it harder to tie down? Because I think figuring that out will figure out how to get funding.
It's $1 million question.
Seem more desirable.
It is a very good question. I think, well, there are many reasons. So I'm not claiming to know all of them. Whenever I think about a topic like that, I think of what can I do to change things? And if I follow the same logic, I would argue that our discipline has not done enough to demonstrate our value to funding agencies.
Sure. Okay.
There may be other reasons. There may be bias in these agencies. There probably is bias in these agencies towards certain disciplines. But what we can change, what we can affect, is that we can make a better case for what we do, and a case that they can understand. So an NSF program director, if you go to them and tell them my work is great because I say so, yeah, they're going to be very polite, but they're not going to really listen to you, right? So it's how can we make a case in a language that these people who think in certain ways that we know, that they can understand. I think the more we do of that, and not just at the individual researcher level, although that does help. So one of the pieces of advice that I always hear from NSF program directors and my colleagues who got funded through NSF is that you need to talk to the program director. You need to email them and be patient because they're getting 1,000 people trying to reach out to them. But find ways of establishing that relationship, of having them know you, of understanding what is it that they're looking for, which takes time. It's a relationship that needs nurturing. But that does help. That does increase your ability. If you apply and not get funded, don't be shy about sending them an email asking for why. Some of them are good about sending you feedback. Sometimes you don't get anything. You're just not funded. And it's tough, right? Because again, we all think our work is great. But sometimes you need to kind of bite the bullet and send an email and say, yeah, please tell me what can I improve next time? What was bad about my proposal? The challenge is when you get a response saying, there was nothing bad, you were just one line under the cutoff line. And I've had that once, and it's really bad. Because that's how they do. They rank, they get feedback, they rank the proposal, and then they start from number 1 and go down the list until they run out of money. And sometimes it does happen that you were actually recommended for funding by the review panel. They just didn't have enough money. And if they tell you that, that hurts. Yeah, absolutely. You try again. You try again. So having a thick skin helps as well. Okay?
Also, I think that's
Yeah.
the architecture program for a very long time, but navigate the university technical process, they sort themselves as we're not researching, we are designers. And they do that for a very long time. Now it's changing, and that's why I mentioned credibility. To go to any college and say I'm a researcher in architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you guys just wrote this and had to build. So that you have to establish, establish a relation, but the relationship is show how important your contribution to their field and connect to them, so on. Until you establish that, you say, oh yeah, you know the researcher and architecture who is doing this, then because it's in their benefit to have a long instead of only them. So having you will become part of their thinking about the project.
And I would argue working in multidisciplinary teams goes a long way towards addressing that, because even if you have a small role, you're still, through working with other partners, you're helping yourself, but you're also helping the discipline as a whole, because you're kind of dispelling this perception that architecture and research are different, which I personally don't agree with. You can be an architectural researcher. You can be a very rigorous and very impactful architectural research. I don't have to be an engineer and do engineering research, but I can do very effective and very valuable architectural research that still meets the quality measurements that these fields accept in a certain way, a slightly different way than them, but it still does meet it. But it's making that case, it's having them go through that experience. I don't think we've done enough of that yet. And universities really do encourage interdisciplinary research now. Funding agencies encourage interdisciplinary research now. It's one of our easiest ways in if we want to have a way in. So, which was my next point, but kind of jumped into that, collaboration. It really helps. It really, really helps to collaborate. Collaboration is not easy. It's kind of like group work. I do a lot of group work in my courses, and it can be painful for students to work in groups. It really is, because it requires them to acquire a skill set that in most of their prior studios that they were not asked to do. They were told that this is the program, design your project, You don't have to think about anybody else. Yeah, talk to them, discuss ideas and so on, but this is your work. So that sense of individual ownership is very strong in both students, and I would argue many of our faculty. And I'm not arguing against that. I'm just saying that there are other ways to do things, right? That you can collaborate. And if you do collaborate, the value of what you produce probably will be better. Because you're drawing, if it works well, let's put it that way. If it doesn't work well, then that's a problem. And if you're collaborating with other disciplines, then there is an enormous learning curve that you have to go through and they have to go through so that you find a common language, a language that both of you understand. And it takes some doing, especially if you're working with the hard sciences and technology people, because they are very rigid in what they consider to be research, what they don't consider to be research, and how they do things. So we talk about research methods. My colleagues in biomedical engineering don't have research methods. They have, so one of them told me that I don't write a methodology section. I tell my students that the methodology section is the most important piece of anything that they write. I have a colleague in biomedical engineering who heard me say that once and told me, by the way, I don't write a method section. I just copy it from a previous paper because we all do the same thing. Because this is the best way to do it. And a paper changing that methodology would be a major paper in their field or in their sub-discipline because it would be suggesting a major change. That's a completely different mindset to work with. And other disciplines have different approaches. I was shocked when I heard that, but then I actually went back and looked at some of his earlier papers, and yes, they all had verbatim the same methodology section, copy and paste. To me, that's plagiarism. To him, that's good science. Because that's the way that everybody has done, tried, tested, and it works. It gets the best results. Until somebody finds a better way, they're all going to do it that way. So let me wrap up by some suggestions. Let's start with, you find a position, you accept the position, what do you do? Startup packages are a good starting point. Not all universities offer them. Some do, some don't. Some have small scale ones, some have bigger ones. In my first tenure track position, my startup package was a computer. But they actually gave me a computer to work on and counted it as a startup package. That was it. I'm happy to say that's not the case anymore. But again, we're not like, I mean, I know colleagues who come in with $500,000 or a lab. Like their startup packages give me a lab. That could be multi-million-dollars. But obviously with the promise of generating like 5-fold as much money within the next X number of years, right? We're not there yet, but there are universities that are offering startup packages now. It could be hiring a student to work with you. That makes a massive difference, especially if you're a university that has either an MS or a PhD program. Having a student to work with you who is not spending all of their time in studio, nothing against our MArch students. Our MArch students are wonderful. They just don't have a lot of bandwidth to spend with you, right? But if you can fund a GA or an RA that does have time to work with you, that helps a lot. PhD students are obviously better because they stay with you longer. Master students, the challenge is by the time you actually teach them certain things, they're leaving. So you're constantly helping people acquire skills, but you don't really reap the benefits of that as much. But with a PhD student, yeah, the first year they're learning from you, second, third, and fourth year, they're really helping you. They're expanding what you can do. So it does help quite a bit. Sometimes your department can fund that for you. That could be your startup package. Universities like funding students because it's one of their objectives. So that's probably one of the easier things that you can negotiate going into an institution. Release time. Great if you can have it. As an administrator, I'm telling you, it is not easy to have. We are all under pressure. All universities are under pressure, and giving you release time, while not impossible, is probably not an easy thing to do. But can you ask for it? Absolutely. Go for it. Why not? Start with small things and then build up. So yeah, if you have institutional seed grants, start with those. If many universities have foundations attached to the university, these are a lot easier to get funding from. Start with those. Then just don't stop there. Use it as leverage for the next step. Get to know people. Maybe you're not there yet, but my biggest advantage from coming to any conference, in addition to the papers, but the papers I can read in a proceeding, right? So I can pull up a proceedings after the conference and read the papers. Yes, seeing the presenter work is better. I can ask questions, etc. But really the biggest advantage of coming to a conference like this is networking, is getting to know people, is letting people know you. Because these are your potential collaborators. These are the people who are going to write tenure review letters for you at a certain point. So don't be shy about reaching out to people and talking to them and introducing yourself and building, even before you have a position, the more you're known, the easier things will be in the future.
That's why it's important to participate in international conferences.
Absolutely.
And maybe international organizations, maybe you get on the board or something.
That absolutely. So yeah, if you can have a service role in an organization that is related to your discipline, that can help you build that network, go for it. It is additional time that you have to spend. But I think all of you have figured out that we don't work 40-hour weeks, right? That would be my easy week. If I do only 40 hours, that would be my easy week. Then, Julien, please. You were saying something? Okay. So third year review, around that third year review, again, continue to build on your collaboration, go for the next step, maybe local contracts, local funding agencies. If you want to go after a large further program, do, but again, have that backup plan ready. Think about what would be your pièce de résistance, your major achievement in year 5. And again, if you can plan things so that it happens in year 5, then you're in very good shape. Release time is easier to get when you're preparing your dossier. So most chairs, good deans would help you, would give you like one course release in the spring of year 5, which is your time for putting together all of that material. Keep things, do not throw things away. You'll be surprised the amount of time it takes to sift through your email to find this invitation or this piece of information about the acceptance rate or this thing that you did in the committee and so on. So be a pack rat to a certain degree. Keep things, store them. You will need them at a certain point. And then hopefully you will be extremely successful. And I wish you all the best. Thank you. Any questions? Any other? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you. Take care.
Hope to see you soon.
Yep, that would be good.